Mesdames, Messieurs, bienvenue pour cette deuxième journée du dialogue spécialisé du partenariat. Je vous rappelle que vous pouvez suivre cette conversation dans 3 langues grâce aux casques et aux mécanismes de traduction qui sont disponibles ici et là. Le canal numéro 1, c'est l'anglais. Le canal numéro 2, c'est le français. Le canal numéro 3, c'est l'espagnol. I would love to be able to say that in Spanish, but you would really make fun of me. So I'm going to say it in English with the hope that our Spanish speakers will get me. You can follow the discussions in 3 languages using the devices that are available here and there. Channel 1 will be for English, Channel 2 is for French, and Channel 3 is in Spanish. Welcome back to the Global Partnership Specialized Policy Dialogue. Yesterday, as you remember, our main objective was to look at some of the practicalities of effectively partnering with the private sector in the pursuit of sustainable development at country level in particular. So today we'll go one step further and look in more details at the roles and expectations that different partners have from each other. What do governments and development providers expect from the private sector, from civil society, and in turn, what do investors hope that these partners can deliver to help them do their job? Aligning expectations is critical to building trust and long-lasting relationships, as well as investment strategies. To wrap up that morning discussion, the closing panel will look at how all these insights can help shape some guidelines for effective private sector engagement through development cooperation, because again, what we're doing here is not just have a nice discussion, it aims to feed into a concrete deliverable further in the process. I'm now inviting Paloma Duran y La Laguna, the head of the Division for Global Partnership and Policies of the Directorate for Development Cooperation at the OECD, to introduce the session and facilitate the panel. Paloma.
Thanks a lot, and good morning to everyone. I'm not sure that we are going to fix all the problems and all the issues that we have in the list, but at least we are going to try to have a very active conversation about really looking forward. I think that this is the main goal of this session, because I think that yesterday many of you participated in the different events that we have, and it's very clear that we need to try to find how to put together all the synergies among all the actors. Governments, private sector, civil society, parliamentarians, trade unions, academia. And it's not easy, really, to have this conversation. So, and at the same time, one of the things that yesterday we realized again is that there is no universal solution in order to see how to implement that and how to promote these kind of partnerships. So it's very clear yesterday we were talking about trust, accountability, transparency, synergies, and many other issues that are not easy to tackle. But I think that in this panel, keeping in mind that the main goal of all the things that we are discussing is to improve the life of the people, mainly the people in need, which is something that we cannot forget when we discuss this type of questions. But keeping that in mind, I think that the idea is to see how can we generate good results. How can we work together in a better way in order to generate really good results for the people? So the idea is to organize this session in 2 different blocks. In the first one, the idea is to see how are really the roles and expectations, as our HB already mentioned. And also, in the second part, the idea is to see how are we going really to approach to effectiveness of the partnerships at the country level. So in order to have these 2 approaches or these 2 blocks, we are going to have in the table representation from governments, from civil society, from the parliament, also from the unions. And I think that we are going to have like the different angles about the work that we are doing. But before to start with the panel, I would like just to invite you to respond to our leaf poll. We have prepared a question with some possible answers for you to choose from. Up to 3 responses are possible. So please vote over the next minutes, and we will try also to see the results during our conversation. So we are going to start first with the first part on role and expectations. We have with us Mr. Atkinson, who is the Director General from Swedish Development Agency. So welcome, the Assistant Director General. Well, it's a kind of a promotion, always very, very appreciated. But anyway, for the timing, he is the Assistant Director, so apologies for that. So you are the head of the Department on Partnerships and Innovation. And what is really the Swedish approach to this work with the private sector that probably, I don't know if maybe with a specific example you can also illustrate the work that your country is doing? Thanks.
Sure. I'll use 2 quick examples. On the one hand, working in the field in the development context, we find initiatives that we can do that are supportive of private sector development, for example, occupational training. I'll come back to a larger example later in our panel discussion. But then we also work, for example, to mobilize Swedish private sector actors with collaboration networks and platforms, we call them. So, for example, 28 large Swedish companies who collaborate to share information and promote their own activities together on the realization of the SDGs, and 18 large pension funds and other asset owners and managers who similarly collaborate to work together to realize the vision, leading sometimes to self-organized programs where they invest in World Bank funds and things like that. So we use at least those 2 approaches, and I can talk more about more specifics later.
Thank you so much. Yeah, maybe we can elaborate a little bit more later on. But, you know, I think that it's also important to have like the other angle maybe, which is the bank. We have here today Mr. Sander, who is the representative of the bank here in Europe. And we are really grateful that you have the chance to be here with us. And I think that the bank has a very long story working with the private sector. I'm sure that maybe you can illustrate a little bit what the bank is doing now with the private sector at the country level.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to be here. Maybe I should start with, I don't know whether that was discussed yesterday, but I think it is always worth remembering, how do we at the World Bank Group look at this issue? And for us, I mean, I could give it different labels. It is maximizing finance for development, it's the cascades, it's IFC 3.0, or I would say most importantly, it's the Hamburg Principles. The G20 at the Hamburg Summit agreed common principles for mobilizing private sector finance for development objectives. Now, there is some very elaborate language that I'm sure the delegations have carved up, but the nutshell of that is private sector first. So when a government intends to have a large investment, the first reflex should be, is there a private sector solution? And I will give you an example in a minute from Cameroon, but those of you who have recently visited Jordan and seen the new airport, that is such a case. And I think, why is Jordan interesting? And Cameroon is already part of the new spirit, but Jordan really was a game changer. The investment officer of the bank was approached by the government, can you finance this airport? And he said no, which is, I mean, if you know the dynamics and incentives at the bank, that's an odd thing to say. Basically, the proposition was, can we not create a situation whereby we have a private sector solution to this? And usually I think there are 3 issues, and I think that's where we really have to look at to make sure that the outcomes we achieve, if we have private sector financing for development challenges, that we get it right. The first is, why are they not doing it without us? Why does it take the World Bank Group and the other bilateral agencies or other multilateral development banks to engage? Typically, it's the regulatory framework that is not right. Can a foreign investor engage in a certain sector? What are the majorities? There are all sorts of things to be done. So the way we go about it, it is our role at the World Bank, IBRD IDA, to make sure to engage with the government to get the regulatory framework right. And there are all sorts of things, and we can go to this in more detail if you want. The next step is, of course, it's about risk. Sometimes you have maybe a regulatory environment, either it has been right or it has been fixed, but still there is risk. There is political risk. There are all sorts of risks. We always say it is not the role of the multilateral development banks to take away the entrepreneurial risk. Private sector is about entrepreneurship. It's about risk-taking. And that we don't want to change. But there are risks beyond the usual entrepreneurial risk that has to be covered, like expropriation. There's a whole list of things. And that's something that where the public funds, international public development funds, have a role to play. And the third one is, of course, mobilizing money. IFC invests, IFC gives loans to private sector operators, and also advises the regulator, the authorities to engage. So these are very important parts. And then a bit anticipating the second round, but I just want to flag it here, safeguards. When the World Bank Group is engaged in a project, our safeguards apply to the entire project. And that is tremendously important because not everybody said, oh, great, let's have the private sector do development investments. Not that not everybody agreed that the money was needed, but is this the right thing? Do we get the right outcomes? Do we protect really the people that need to be protected? And our policy is very clear. If there's a World Bank Group project that we are engaged in, our safeguards, environmental and social safeguards apply. So there is protection, and maybe we can talk about it, about the details later. The concrete example, apart from the Amman airport, is a hydropower plant in Cameroon that I want to mention here. It's a 420 megawatt, so it's a medium-sized plant. And the key figure, the change that it brought about, is from a kilowatt hour at 2.8 cents is to 0.06. So it's a significant reduction of more than down to less than a quarter of what it was before. So it makes energy cheaper, and also it's hydropower, so it is renewable energies. And the interesting thing is what I just spelled out about getting the regulatory environment right, creating guarantees, investment by IFC and a loan by IFC, and continued advisory services from our private sector team at IFC and at the World Bank really helped to get that off the ground. The project has been signed in November, and there's a 35-year commitment of the national operator to maintain energy costs at this level. And maybe a final word, what do we expect? We expect, and I think that's the message that the G20 have sent to us at the World Bank and all the other multilateral development banks, stick to the Hamburg principles and engage. Don't go the easy way. Yes, we make a government loan of $500 million and it's fine. No, go the extra mile and do it and make that money that you would have invested in an operation like the airport, like the power plant, make it available for sectors where maybe it's less obvious to have a private sector solution. And the message to the private sector is just one word: engage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that this approach is. I'm sure we are going to have some questions from the floor, because yesterday we already opened the debate about that, and also how to ensure really that the private sector is selected in the right way, the due diligence processes, and many other issues. But maybe we can also go back later on. And then we are going to have in this first part like a third angle, which is the unions. And Paola Simonetti from the International Trade Union Confederation knows very well the global partnership, I think. Yeah. And you are an important advocate for greater effectiveness of development cooperation. So I would like that maybe you explain what's the role of the unions in this whole process.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, I can say that I'm a veteran of the global partnership since many years now, but I have the pleasure to work with you and with such an important arena of organizations and stakeholders. So trade unions are indeed very much convinced that the development effectiveness agenda, and now together with the sustainable development goals, should be really the polar star to follow and to implement in order to improve the development policies implementation, but also development instruments that might be put forward. So in that sense, I very much welcome this discussion and the possibility really to go deeper into the analysis of these new trends regarding innovative finance and the involvement of the private sector. Because, of course, for the unions is very much the core business, if you like, of their mission. In general, trade unions are social partners, so together with employers, representatives, and with governments, they normally are involved in the socio-economic and environmental policy decision-making at all levels, at national level, local level, but also regional and global. So in that sense, we do believe that this conversation around innovative finance, it's nothing different or should be nothing different from the normal dialogue that should be running between the social partners or among the social partners. We also think that the SDGs are, as I said before, really an opportunity that the trade unions are advocating to be, followed by all the major stakeholders. And yesterday, actually, we had a very interesting panel. I was listening to it also with the investors. And it's very, very much important that the SDGs are actually incorporated, integrated as a new business model. So, and this is easier to be said than to be done, because looking at the sustainability and the report of this investor actors, for example, just to mention one, in Denmark, one of the biggest pension fund investor manager, I mean, you can read in the report that the fund manager reporting has made it clear that the fund to provide adequate reporting on SDGs is a monumental and complex task. But however, we know that there are actors that are already doing that, and they are already implementing an adequate reporting to the SDGs. Also, the annual impact investor survey of 2017, you can read there that few investors cited reasons related to refine the theory of change and set appropriate impact objectives and impact targets vis-à-vis the SDGs. So there are still very much, quite big challenges there. Also, listening to the panel yesterday, there are challenges also in how this rating can be actually put in place against the SDGs. And so, I mean, there are still a work in progress to be made, and trade unions advocate very much for this change of the business model in that sense. Also, some other points that I would like to mention, since, of course, governments and development financial institutions are here. We have done, we just completed our recent mapping on aligning blended finance to development effectiveness, where we are at. This is an analysis that you can find on the ITUC website. Well, there we detected that there are still issues that really deserve attention, both from the government side, from the donor side. So what are really the policies that donors, governments are putting in place to guarantee the accountability of the involvement of the private sector in development initiatives, but also looking at specific bilateral DFIs, we also spotted some major weaknesses when it comes to, for example, ownership, mutual accountability, and development results. So going back and referring to the development effectiveness agenda principles. So we will go in detail later, but what we really are asking is really to have like criteria, specific criteria for engagement with private sector in development that are endorsed by the donor governments, by the DFIs, by the investors, so by the private actors. Because, of course, here we are talking about, specifically when we talk about blending using public resources, we are talking about public money to be used to the private sector investment in development. So it's even more stringent in that context to have accountability criteria, very clear, very specific, and of course to have social dialogue to be really implemented, because we believe that the workers, the colleague from the World Bank just mentioned the labor safeguards and for the World Bank, but of course there the laborers and the trade unions are really the ones who can help to make it really real and implemented in the reality and at that country level. So we would like really to have social dialogue and workers' participation across the board to guarantee implementation and accountability of this operation. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. So, Paola, just listening to you, is there any specific experience where the unions are working with the private sector and the government in the field together? Because I suppose that when we talk about the unions, the approach in every country is completely different, even the regulations about the role of the unions with the private sector. So how do you handle that from the union? Is there, from the Confederation, is there a specific example of the work that you are doing together? Because I think that maybe it can illustrate a little bit the narrative.
Yeah, of course, the examples that I have, there are many examples in terms of social dialogue, of course. If we talk about the national policies, of course, we can mention loads of examples of areas where the unions, the social partners, are working with employer organizations in order to unfold, many areas like, for example, climate justice with the just transition. We can mention, the example of South Africa, for example, where unions and employers together are working with the government in order to put forward really a just transition policy and transition from to the carbon to the green, of course, economy. On the formalization of informal economy, there are many examples around the world, in the past in Argentina, but also in the Philippines, where the unions are, working with employers in order to grant, the sustainability of informal workers and to grant their rights to be respected and to help in exiting the informal economy. So these are the various examples. But of course, there are more specific examples when it comes to the collaboration with private sector. I mentioned earlier the pension funds. The pension funds are a very important place where trade unions are also represented in the board, and of course, they are part of the decision making and they influence the orientation of these funds. But of course, there are also challenges. Here in the again in our brief, again you can find it on the website. Making private sector investment in development programs aligned with the SDGs, and this is what I was saying before. You can find also examples on how difficult it is also for the trade unions to get into the scene. For example, the barrage construction in Malawi, it was an example of blended finance, and there we could find a weak implementation of labor standards. No one of the workers interviewed was aware of the basic labor regulations, and only 23% were aware of the existence or a relevant trade union. Again, in establishment of a special economic zone in Haiti, out of the 6,000 jobs created, an overwhelming majority were under appalling conditions. Approximately 87% of the workers did not earn the daily minimum wage. So these are just examples. There are many, of course, where if there is no worker participation, if there is no social dialogue, these things might happen. So the dialogue in that sense is a way of course, protecting the rights of workers, but also a way to really conduce and to promote sustainability.
Okay, I think that is very clear that the approach is a little bit different from each angle. You want maybe to add something? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I thought I was just saying hello, so I didn't tell my story.
Go ahead with your story, and maybe we can move on to the second part of the.
If that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I didn't want to pay short shrift to the example that we brought to share. Because the way that CEDA works with the private sector is quite complex, and there are many pieces to it. We do challenge funds, for example, as seed capital to get things going. We work with guarantees in the private sector arena, blended finance to mobilize capital. But I thought it would be best to take a concrete story, one that we're particularly happy about right now. If we start from the understanding that we have this huge gap, if we have a red queen problem, I would say. If we take a specific problem, like electrification in Africa. 600 million people without electricity. The number is going to be exactly the same in 20 years if we don't find more creative and effective ways to speed up the investment levels. It's a red queen problem because you have to run as fast as you're going now to stay in exactly the same place. So we at CEDA are always looking for how best to use our special role as a development partner to mobilize capital and to mobilize private sector engagement. I mentioned a couple of ways, but just to take one specific story. Under the banner of a program called Power Africa, working in Zambia, where only 4% of the population in the rural regions has access to electricity, our colleagues working with partners there came up with a very interesting scheme. And what's important to the topic of our panel here is what roles people are playing and what language they're speaking. So we're government. We don't speak the language of investment in our role as development partners. We speak the language of other languages. In this case, we used the language of procurement. And of course, because it's not normal procurement, it has a special name, social impact procurement. And what CEDA did was to go out into the market and say, we want to buy electrification for 1 million Zambians with off-grid solutions, more or less. And we'll pay this much per connection, and we are asking the private sector to make bids. Bids came in, 4 contractors were selected, and in about a year and a half, things had really taken off to the point where we now expect that when that program has run its course, there'll be over 1 million Zambians that have access to light, electricity, and also not just in households, but also small businesses out in the rural regions. It's a long and complex story, but that's the punchline, and there's an even better ending to it, which is the program has been successful enough that in these days, while we're sitting here in Paris, our colleagues back in CEDA are finishing the paperwork to expand that program so that it will reach people up to potentially 5 to 10 million people over time in 4 to 5 countries. So this is a way of using the special role of a development partner, and the way that we work to promote a normative agenda that brings private sector interests in play to dramatically expand our impact. If we were talking the language of investment, which we don't, we would be talking about returns on investment that are 100 to 300% relative instead of small numbers. So I wanted to just underscore that story, that the way we work with the private sector is very targeted, it's very specific, it's very grounded in our vision of making sure that poor people have an opportunity for a better life and a life free of oppression, and to use those creative mechanisms. I'd like to definitely discuss that more with our panel.
Thank you so much, because I think that you just go to one point that we started yesterday to discuss, which is really the different languages and the different roles of every actor. So the idea is not that now the private sector will replace the government, or that the government will replace the investors, or even the unions, or even the civil society, but just to try to find the synergies and to respect the language of the others in order to achieve the goal, which is to improve the life of the people. So I think that, this is a very good example about, how it's feasible to do it. So before to move to the second part of the panel, I don't know if HB is around here in the... No, he's not, because what I would like to see is how is the process with the pool. So maybe we can move to the second part, and then maybe somebody from the team can try to find him and to see how is the process with the pool. So let's move to the second part before to start. I don't know if there is from the audience any question related to the first part of the round table related to roles and responsibilities. I don't know if anybody have any. Please go ahead. If you don't mind to introduce yourself and explain which is the institution where you are working for. Yeah, I think that the micro is coming.
All right. Good morning, and thank you very much. I'm Jiten Yumnam, and representing the CPDC as a Partnership for Development Effectiveness. I just have a question to the World Bank. I was just wondering if the hydropower can still be promoted as an example of sustainability, because there's a series of proven, research and also realities to prove that hydropower, especially the large-scale hydropower projects, are unsustainable already. And in fact, many governments are actually moving away from hydropower projects and also looking into more alternative, more sustainable, and more innovative energy solutions. And I think that is one critical question when you give examples of hydropower, and also because in many areas hydropower is proved to be unsustainable and, involving a series of human rights violations and unaccountability of corporate bodies. And the second aspect of my question is when you talk about the issues around safeguard, because just having a safeguard, I think it is not enough, no? Because we find that there are several cases in energy projects even where World Bank is involved. I can cite several examples. The Turkana wind farm in Kenya, and then the Olkaria geothermal series of phase 1, 2, 3, 4, where the safeguards are not followed, are not complied. And in fact, the indigenous people's policy, for example, is not applied. And in fact, many of the Maasai community or other communities, they have to file complaints with the government, with even, with the respective complaint mechanisms of the DFIs and banks. There's challenges in the application of the safeguards, and finally, the alternatives, and, because as I link it to my first assertion, because everyone is talking about more efficient and more sustainable and more innovative energy solutions, the solar, and then there are series, how can we still stuck to the model like hydropower, which is already proven to be unsustainable? So I just want to leave there, and just want to thank you very much. Yes, finally, the rights framework, and how far the World Bank is trying to emphasize on the human rights framework, when we really wanted to push forward for a result which is more acceptable to the, to the communities, And I think, Thank you very much.
You know what we are going to do, just to try to spend the whole time in the debate that I'm sure is going to be very, very positive. I think that maybe we can take some questions. Please go to the point and to the question. And if we have time, we can just open the debate now. If we don't have time enough, maybe all our panelists are going to be here for the whole morning, so we are going to have additional time also to discuss with them these specific things. So let's go for the next. Who is the next one? Okay, go ahead. 1, 2, 1, 2, and that's it. Okay, and then move to the next block. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I am Jennifer Malonzo from Ibon International. My question also goes to the speaker from the World Bank. You've mentioned...
I think that we need to organize a seminar with the World Bank just to be focused on the role of the World Bank.
This is related to what he discussed about the World Bank's principle of pushing for private finance first, knowing that the profit maximizing logic of market competition among business enterprises. This has often meant reduced wages and undermining the collective bargaining rights of workers. as well as pricing, goods and services beyond the reach of the poor and marginalized. My question is, how do you reconcile such promotion of private finance first with the call of the Sustainable Development Agenda for leaving no one behind when such challenges exist among private sector operations?
Thank you so much. And the other one was here, yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kurniawan Sabar from Institute for National and Democracy Studies Indonesia and part of the CPDE. There are two questions. The first is about the environmental safeguard, environmental and social safeguard of the World Bank. My question is, how do the World Bank decisions about if there is a project in a certain country that violates the safeguard of the World Bank? Is there any experience that World Bank decide to stop or to ban the project if the project is actually violates the safeguard of the World Bank itself? And the second question is how do the World Bank can ensure their accountability for the bad impact of their project and even the failure of the project in the certain country. For example, in Indonesia, we have some experience that project of the World Bank's giving more bad impactful for the people and environment, and also there are some project failure, but till today, we don't see any other effort and ensurable effort of the World Bank to be more accountable for these kinds of projects. So thank you.
Okay, so you know what I'm going to suggest, because you have a lot of questions to reply. So while you think about all the responses, maybe we can move to the second part, and then we can unify all the questions at the end of the panel. So the only thing that I would like just to recall you is that we have this live poll that you can see in the screen. All the responses to the question about what is needed to ensure private sector engagement through development cooperation works for those it aims to benefit. So as you can see, all the questions are there: agreement on a national vision and alignment about the private sector engagement, enhance the coordination among all the actors, targeted engagement of local actors, simplify procedures of development partners, tailor support to the needs of the local private sector, and also increase awareness about the private sector engagement programs and opportunities. So you are going now to have the chance to vote for that, and we are going to see the results in the screen at the end of the panel. So I think that now we are going to move to the second part of the panel, which is more related to the effectiveness. How can we really jointly try to define and monitor and realize all the results together? And also we are going to have like different angles here. We have the representation from the Parliament, civil society, and also from the government. So let's go first to Mr. Gonzalez, who is the Executive Director of the Peruvian Development Agency. And I would like, if you don't mind, just to share the experience that you have in the agency. I think that the statement now is going to be in Spanish, but you have translation. I don't remember in which channel, but 1, 2, or 3. There are no many other options. So please, Mr. Gonzalez, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Paloma. I am the Executive Director of the Peruvian Agency for International Cooperation. Y quiero saludarlos y decirles que estos días, ¿no?, han sido realmente enriquecedores, con una discusión muy amplia que Paloma resumió al iniciar esta jornada. Quiero mencionar que, por supuesto, nuestra agencia y el Perú como país de renta media, ¿no?, hemos asumido los nuevos retos y compromisos, ¿no? Y los esquemas de cooperación que incluyen la incorporación del sector privado como agente de desarrollo. Y hace justamente una semana, en una declaración sobre nuestra política de cooperación técnica internacional, esto ha sido aprobado por el Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores. Y por supuesto, nuestra agencia ha desarrollado un marco conceptual de alianzas multiactor, una propuesta de modelo de gestión que venimos compartiendo con otros países de la región en el marco de los procesos de la cooperación sur-sur. Y sobre esta base hemos promovido algunos proyectos pilotos en los sectores de agricultura, banano orgánico, gestión de recursos hídricos y acuicultura, iniciativas todas en las que interviene el sector público, el sector privado, la cooperación internacional y, por supuesto, las poblaciones de base. A quienes estén interesados tenemos un brochure en inglés y en español que pueden encontrar también en la página web de la Agencia de Cooperación. No quiero, sin embargo, abundar sobre esta metodología y sobre la naturaleza de nuestros procesos multiactor y quiero más bien referirme a algo, para variar, que también mencionó el Banco Mundial, y es el tema de la calidad regulatoria y cómo la calidad regulatoria ha podido, ¿no?, impulsar iniciativas en las que la participación de la cooperación internacional, el sector privado y los propios pobladores, ¿no?, ha sido absolutamente relevante. Se trata de la situación de una cooperativa, ¿no?, en un valle estratégico en nuestro país, que es el Valle del Huallaga, que queda en la selva alta, ¿no?, y que es una de las más relevantes empresas de cacao, que tiene 55 años de existencia y que ha sido sujeto de diversas iniciativas de cooperación internacional a lo largo de su historia. Reúne a 5.000 familias de pequeños agricultores de café y cacao en este valle del río Huallaga y tienen un área de cultivo de 30.000 hectáreas y se encuentran alrededor de uno de los parques nacionales más emblemáticos del Perú, el Parque Cordillera Azul, que también recibe importantes recursos de la cooperación internacional. La tarea de esta cooperativa fue central, ¿no?, en la exitosa estrategia de lucha contra el narcotráfico y los remanentes del terrorismo en esta región, ¿no?, y Naciones Unidas y otros cooperantes financiaron, digamos, en las últimas 3 décadas, plantas de procesamiento de café y de cacao modernas, con capacidad para dar valor agregado a más de 10.000 toneladas de cacao y 3.000 toneladas de café para exportar productos de valor agregado como manteca, polvo de cacao, café verde orgánico, etc. Pero como ocurre con frecuencia en algunos de nuestros países en la región, esta cooperativa fue víctima de su propio éxito, ¿no? La abundancia de recursos, particularmente de dinero, generó malos manejos financieros que hicieron que la cooperativa despilfarrara el dinero, se viera en proceso de cobranza coactiva y de juicios por remate en la banca nacional, con la eventual disolución de la cooperativa, la pérdida de dominio de los cooperativistas y la quiebra de la empresa. Resulta que un grupo de financistas internacionales con vocación social y ambiental privada que tenían líneas de crédito vencidas con la cooperativa, y quiero mencionarlas: Altelia de Francia, Rabo Rural Fund y Oico Credit de Holanda, Root Capital de Estados Unidos, Incofin y Alterfin de Bélgica y Fogal de Perú, entre otros, se juntaron para dar una solución a esta grave situación de la cooperativa de Naranjillo, tratando de evitar su liquidación y asegurar su reestructuración bajo un nuevo gobierno corporativo profesional. Y el rescate financiero fue posible gracias justamente a que el país ha implementado un sistema de calidad regulatoria a partir, ¿no?, de la insolvencia y reestructuración profesional que fue implementada ante el Instituto Nacional de Defensa de la Competencia y de la Producción de la Propiedad Intelectual, proceso que no fue corto, pero que finalmente fue resuelto con el cambio de administración de la cooperativa, con apoyo de la gran mayoría de socios. Se votó un plan de reestructuración de 25 años y sin afectar la economía de los socios, además de la eventual pérdida de dominio sobre los bienes de capital, y se aprobó un plan de inversiones y reinversiones totales de entre 20 y 25 millones de dólares, el cual está actualmente a principio de comenzar. Se espera, pues, que esta cooperativa vuelva a resurgir con este plan y que incluso va a continuar recibiendo, ¿no?, recursos de cooperación para implementar este plan de reestructuración. Ayer hablábamos de la confianza y creo que los resultados de esta iniciativa, que fue, digamos, difundida en la prensa en principios de enero, responde a la firme convicción del sector privado ligado a inversiones de impacto en la posibilidad de recapitalizar una empresa en situación de riesgo, gracias a la confianza en una calidad regulatoria que viene afianzándose a partir de una agencia tecnocrática, ¿no?, y profesional como es el Instituto Nacional de Defensa de la Competencia y de la Propiedad Intelectual. Confianza en los inversionistas, en el marco legal y en los tratados de libre comercio que el Perú, que le permiten exportar café y cacao de manera competitiva y preferencial y el acceso a algunos mercados. Confianza en los agricultores, de que el Estado no ha logrado desarrollar mecanismos para beneficiar al ciudadano a través de políticas públicas que promueven el empleo, la libre competencia y una economía de mercado que le permita dar valor a sus productos. En fin, ¿no?, confianza de todas las partes, ¿no?, de colaborar dentro de un ordenamiento jurídico y el Estado de Derecho sin que exista un conflicto de intereses y en el cual la cooperación internacional, que en última instancia es también dinero público, ¿no?, financió durante varias décadas, ¿no?, y esto está siendo relanzado con apoyo del sector privado, ¿no? Es decir, hemos logrado que el sector privado pueda complementar recursos de la cooperación internacional en un marco jurídico de ordenamiento, ¿no?, público conducido por el sector público, y en el cual nuestra agencia, si bien ha tenido participación, el papel fundamental ha sido promover y articular el conjunto de actores que finalmente han logrado este cometido. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. I think that it is really very helpful also to see the challenges and also some experiences where all the things are not just very clear in one way or another and try to fix the issues or the controversies or the problems. So thank you so much for sharing with us this experience. And now we are going to move to Mali, to the parliamentarian side. As you know, the role of the parliamentarians is often overlooked in development cooperation, not only as a watchdog, but also as a lawmaker. And the Interparliamentarian Union is one of our partners in the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. So we are really pleased to have today Mr. Zizé. I hope that I pronounced the last name in the right way. So thank you so much for coming. I hope that you can explain the experience in Mali, where you are already working with the private sector and you have also some experiences there. So merci beaucoup. I think that we are now moving to the French channel.
Merci beaucoup, Paloma. Et tout d'abord, je remercie l'OCDE qui m'a donné l'occasion de participer donc à cette importante réunion pour partager l'idée sur un sujet aussi crucial pour moi. Pourquoi? Parce que, j'ai été directeur d'entreprise, donc secteur privé. 2, j'ai été ministre au Mali. Et aujourd'hui, je suis parlementaire au Mali. Donc, je parlerai exclusivement de mon expérience en matière de parlementaire ici. Je rappelle que quand on a adopté en 2015 l'agenda 2030, l'Union interparlementaire dont j'ai le plaisir de voir ici le président sortant, M. Chandry, que je souhaiterais qu'il se lève, que tout le monde le voit. S'il vous plaît, levez-vous, M. Chandry, que les gens vous voient. Voilà. C'est lui qui nous a dit à l'époque que pour être crédible, pour être efficace et légalement opposable, l'accord que les 193 chefs d'État ont signé, ont adopté aux Nations Unies, doit être transposé dans la législation nationale. Deuxièmement, être financé par des crédits budgétaires bien adaptés. Et ces crédits, c'est nous qui les votons. Et troisièmement, prévoir des mécanismes de contrôle de l'action du gouvernement. Et c'est le parlementaire qui contrôle le gouvernement. L'UIP, donc, à l'époque, a demandé à ce que les 170 parlements membres, n'est-ce pas, de l'Union, mettent en place une structure chargée du contrôle de l'action du gouvernement dans la mise en œuvre, n'est-ce pas, de l'agenda 2030. Ainsi que le Parlement du Mali, et un mois après l'adoption des ODD, a mis en place un comité de suivi de l'action du gouvernement en matière d'ODD. Mais on ne s'est pas limité à ça. On s'est dit que 2015 a été une année très propice en matière de convention internationale. Il y a l'accord de Sendai, n'est-ce pas, qui a été adopté au Japon, n'est-ce pas, en mars 2015. Il y a les ODD en septembre. Il y a l'accord sur le climat, n'est-ce pas, en décembre 2015, et également l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine. Donc ces 4 conventions sont pour nous extrêmement importantes et jouent un rôle clé en matière de développement durable. C'est ainsi qu'on a fait le plan d'action. On a été voir le Premier ministre du Mali. On dit, Monsieur le Premier ministre, avec votre gouvernement, en tant que Parlement, on vous demande 4 choses essentielles. 1. Il faudrait que le gouvernement adopte un plan national de développement durable. De préparer ce plan avec le secteur privé, les élus locaux et la société civile. Deuxièmement, on dit au gouvernement du Mali de rédiger un rapport national d'étape avec les mêmes partenaires, cités ci haut, à soumettre à l'examen volontaire à l'occasion du forum politique de haut niveau qui se tient tous les ans en juillet aux Nations Unies. Troisièmement, on voudrait qu'en 2018, n'est-ce pas, que les ODD soient carrément transcrits dans nos budgets. Et que le Parlement souhaite aussi avoir au niveau du gouvernement un point focal pour la mise en œuvre des ODD. Donc ces 4 points, on dit, si vous ne les faites pas, on sera obligé de faire une résolution au Parlement et de vous les rendre contraignants. Et en termes de résultats, le gouvernement a fait face à ces 4 engagements. C'est pourquoi le Mali était présent en juillet dernier aux Nations Unies pour défendre son rapport de haut niveau. Et le secteur privé, la société civile étaient tous associés. Bon, le Parlement a dit que c'est bon d'avoir des textes, mais il faudrait voter une loi sur le partenariat public-privé. Et cette loi, le gouvernement a fait un projet. Et nous, on a appelé le secteur privé au Parlement pour les écouter avec le projet de loi pour dire est-ce que vous partagez ce document? Ils ont dit oui. Parce qu'il faut se dire une chose. Et avec le faible niveau économique et le poids de la dette publique du Mali, l'aide publique au développement à lui seul ne permettra pas d'atteindre les ODD, l'agenda 2030. Ce n'est pas possible. Il faut que le secteur privé soit associé. Donc, il faut alors attirer les investisseurs avec un cadre juridique environnemental fiable. C'est pourquoi donc, on a voté les PPP, la loi le 16 décembre 2016. Et le secteur privé a pris largement parti avant le vote. Donc, après le vote de la loi, le gouvernement a mis en place une cellule chargée du suivi directement rattaché à la primature. Cette cellule travaille aussi en collaboration avec tous les ministères sectoriels sur les propositions de projets soumis à l'État malien dans le cadre du PP. Pour résumer, les parlementaires, ils jouent un rôle d'agence matrimoniale, au fait. Donc c'est le Parlement qui essaie de voir chacun ses intérêts tout en pensant à son peuple. Donc c'est ce Parlement qui permet donc au peuple de vivre tranquillement, qui permet au privé d'investir de façon très sérieuse, mais tout en s'engageant dans la responsabilité sociétale et environnementale, et aussi éviter la corruption et également l'évasion fiscale. Donc le Parlement, au fait, on joue ce rôle régulateur, mais très souvent on constate qu'on oublie les parlementaires chaque fois qu'on parle d'investissement, alors que si l'investisseur vient dans notre pays pour investir, c'est nous qui autorisons le gouvernement à acheter le crédit. Sans le Parlement, ça ne passera pas. Donc voilà un peu, je discutais tantôt avec mon voisin de gauche, José, qui m'a remis un document publicitaire que voici ici. J'ai dit, mais José, dans ton document, je vois ici à gauche le secteur privé, le gouvernement, je vois la société civile, les universités, mais il n'y a pas de Parlement. Donc le rôle du Parlement n'est pas là. Il me dit, effectivement, vous avez raison, et qu'arrivé au pays, on va essayer de corriger un peu notre document. Merci, Madame la modératrice.
Okay, merci beaucoup. I think that really that's the beauty of the global partnership, that you can have the approach from all the actors, and we are trying to listen everyone, which I think that is really important. So last but not least, we have also the angle of the civil society before to open the discussion that I'm sure that our colleague from the World Bank is ready to reply to everything. But I hope that we are going to have a discussion beyond the role of the World Bank, even if I'm a completely believer about the work that you are doing. But maybe we can give the floor to the civil society organization in order to open the debate with everyone. So please, Beverly is from the Civil Society Partnership for Development Effectiveness. As you know, also in the Global Partnership for Effective Development, we have also the representation of the civil society that now is the fourth co-chair also in the partnership. So I think that it's important also to listen the side of the civil society. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Paloma. I also come from the indigenous people's constituency, being indigenous myself, and I come from the Philippines, which I think many of you would know is not a shining example of diplomacy or probably respect for human rights. I'd like to make some probably four points in relation to private sector engagement in development, largely also from experience as being part of an indigenous community. In fact, I come from a community wherein the generation of my parents and grandparents fought a World Bank-funded project. And it took them like more than 25 years until officially the World Bank withdrew together with the government, the Philippine government at that time. One, I think, many of us will keep on talking about the private sector being game changers or catalysts for development. However, I think from the perspective of civil society or indigenous peoples for that matter, we have yet to see, really, honestly, the impacts of private sector engagement in development. If indeed their interventions, their activities, or their projects would actually reduce poverty and inequality. Because the narratives from our side speaks the opposite. Still, we see we hear of stories of displacement. We see stories of destruction of livelihood, destruction of the environment, and of course, the growing or intensifying attacks against environmental defenders, human rights defenders, is escalating not only in Asia but actually all over in different parts of the world. So I think we need to have more discussions really on the evidences, on really addressing these issues if indeed national development or national interest is being addressed by private sector engagement. Second, there is certainly an issue of mistrust, and that's really a reality. There's also a question of good faith, no? But we have to understand that this mistrust did not happen overnight. I mean, it did not just happen and fall from the sky, but it actually was built from people's and communities' experience of years, probably decades and centuries of negative impacts of private sector engagement. So I think before we even say, let's address the issue of mistrust or the issue of good faith, is that we have to understand also the historical context where these relationships were built. And we cannot just simply forgive or forget or move on, but we have to address those issues that bring about mistrust. Third, probably a lot of us would say, here comes civil society again, here comes indigenous peoples again. All they do is criticize, all they do is protest. For one, I think that's one role wherein we can play in, to be able to give an objective criticism on existing policies, on existing mechanisms, on existing relationships, based on actual experiences on the ground. And of course, the realization that this is not easy, and of course, this is not a short process. I mean, the global partnership took how many years for it to move on? And in fact, it's still an ongoing debate if indeed the global partnership is effective. And of course, we've seen that through dialogues, through different mechanisms, we can move on. And I think the fourth one is we always speak of private sector in general terms. But the reality, I think, the way I've seen it from how many for a few years of engaging with the global partnership is that we have to realize that there is a diversity even among the so-called private sector. The objectives are different, probably the areas of interest are different, the expertise are different, and the modes of operation are different. Therefore, one responsibilities also cannot be, the same, common. No? It has also to address these differences. Because when we are able to identify these differences, probably we will also be able to clearly identify the role and, of course, the contribution that each private sector will do. But of course, amidst diversity, there should also be a commonality. And I think, from the perspective of civil society, a commonality would be one, the respect of people's rights, a common goal of development not for a minority, not for a majority, but for the people, and an inclusive and democratic processes. Definitely, the responsibilities or the accountability of a cooperative would be different from an accountability of a multinational company or a transnational company. I mean, we have to make this difference. And probably the last would be, while we speak of private sector role in development, I hope this would not also lead to a diminishing of government's duty as far as human rights is concerned, as far as providing public services for the people. And this goes to the point of, I mean, I was looking at the results of the poll. A big part of it actually will also involve local, domestic, small and medium enterprises, because in some cases, when you speak of private sector, countries or donor countries that actually deal with either multinational or transnational companies, or even their own private sector, like loans can be provided that this project will be under the consultancy of the firm of the donor. So I think we also have to look into the contribution of the local and domestic small and medium enterprise. And I think relationships also between all the stakeholders and rights holders, I think, are best defined within the framework of solidarity rather than from a framework of political and economic hegemony. So probably with that, unless all of these are addressed, the direction will be development is not going to the people, but rather we will have a situation wherein development is captured by corporate interests. Hopefully in the next round of discussion, I'll be able to give specific experiences of indigenous peoples on how do we address development from our perspective, wherein we do not receive, we are not the priority of government services as far as electricity, agricultural development, roads, and etc. But we have managed to be able to implement certain projects that would address the needs, at the same time being able to cope up with modern technology and development. So with that, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Beverly, because I think that it's also important to listen the side of the civil society, even if I think that it really reinforces the narrative that we already are using, in the sense that there is no universal solution for this, and in each country, of course, the situation is different. And I think that the other reference that maybe we need to keep in mind is also the Agenda 2030, that for sure changed completely the approach to the work with all the actors. And I think, the first thing is that, of course, the agenda is now a universal agenda, not only for the so-called developing countries. So I think that the fact that we have a universal commitment to integrate the SDGs in the work of every country is really something. But for sure, we need to see in each case and in each setting how to find the synergies. As you mentioned, I don't think that the idea is that the private sector is going to replace now the governments or vice versa. I think that the idea is to try to have all the actors working together for the same goal, which is, I repeat, to improve the life of the people. So before to open the debate and also to give the floor to our dear colleague from the World Bank, ready to reply to all the answers, I think that it's important also that we keep a little bit in mind the results of the poll that I think that are also very significant, because the two main, the two questions that have the main support are the need for the coordination among the actors, which is, a very clear message, but also tailored support to the needs of the local private sector, which means that it's very clear also the need to ensure the national ownership. The Paris Declaration from 2005 is still alive, and we need really to ensure that is the society and the country that really make the decisions about the priorities that they have. It's not something that we can impose or propose from outside. So I think that the idea of the national ownership is very clear here. So let's move now to the questions. Please go ahead with the previous questions, and maybe we can open the floor for the second round.
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, I'm quite happy that we had the second part of the tour of the panel before I answer the question, because I think that's really at the heart of it. Let me make three general observations and then specifically to the questions. Why are we having this debate in the first place? Why didn't we just continue with national governments using their own budgets and the World Bank and the other banks giving their loans? All is nice. And the bilateral agencies, of course. Why? Because it's not enough. Is it $1 trillion a year? Is it $1.5 trillion? Is it $2 trillion a year? Doesn't matter. Way beyond that could ever come from the public purse. We have $120, $130 billion a year. Something like that is going to stay. With these amounts of money, the SDGs are not going to happen. So there is no question, private sector, we like it, we don't. That's the only way forward. So the question, the debate that we're having here today, that we had in Addis and we will continue to have is, how can we do it in the best possible way? Yeah? So it's not a question of, that somebody said, oh, let's give them money. No, we, the development community, want private sector investment to achieve our development goals, which are, as you've just said rightly, the global development goals. That's the point. I think that's very important to bear in mind. It's not a nice to have, or somebody thought it would be a good idea. It is the only way. Poverty eradication. How is it going to happen? What we don't want is a situation that we finance a government program with debt, employ people, and then the program runs out, the country has more debt, and the jobs are gone again. So that's a little bit to the question about profit maximization. What we want is sustainable economic growth. So the projects that the World Bank and all the other global agencies and the governments do should lead to investments that are sustainable, economically sustainable. So companies make a profit and stay, and they don't close. So that the jobs that people are having in these investments are good money, sustainable money, and decent wages paid. That's the point of it. So I think to question the legitimacy of a company seeking profit, why shouldn't they do it? A private company is not a charity organization. What we have discussed earlier, and I think also there's the topic here about tailored support and getting it right, is to create an environment for a company to make a profitable investment. Not profitable for a day, for a month, for a year. It's a long-term profitable investment that we want to help create so that the jobs that get people out of poverty are sustainable. So I think there is nothing wrong about a company seeking profit. We want companies seeking profit because that leads them to propose a viable project. The third point, Jose Antonio, you have mentioned it, Kimberly, you have mentioned it, trust. Of course it's about trust. And I do take the point that not everything has always been perfect from the beginning of time. No, it's not. And even with everything we have done, and I think the World Bank Group has done an enormous global outreach with civil society, with governments, with private sector, to do it much better. I would probably say, of course it's not perfect. Yeah? And it is not maybe not perfect the way it is written, but also it has to be lived, and that takes trust moving forward. So I think it's very important that this has been mentioned. Specifically now to the project hydropower. It's a run-of-the-river project, and I think a lot of the debates we had in the past about is hydropower renewable and what are the negative side effects. It is a run-of-the-river project which actually creates thousands of jobs in its construction, and also down the road. So I think in terms of getting people out of poverty and having a run-of-the-river project which has a minimum environmental side effect, and having record low displacement, I think it's as far as we can go with hydropower. Why hydropower? Yes, of course, we would be happy if all the energy needs of the world could be done with solar. Beautiful. Cannot be done. We need everything we can. And that brings me to the question about accountability and who controls the World Bank. What is the World Bank? We don't own ourselves. We are owned by the governments of the world, 189 of them. They decide, and we implement. So the question is, will the World Bank stop a project? Well, our shareholders will tell us there is no majority for this, don't do it. So a government proposes a project, we consult, we develop a proposal, and that goes to the shareholders. So the shareholders take the decision to do it, and also for the correction. We have a mechanism. If a project has started, mistakes have been made, then we have to engage. So once a project has started, there is a correction mechanism. But, and I think the examples were given, sometimes the project will not even be started because the consultations have shown it's not right. But ultimately, the bank is not operating in its own right. The bank is operating on behalf of its shareholders. And almost all projects are unanimous. I think that is also worth noting. It is not, it is 51 to 49 and just about they got it through the board. No, it's almost always unanimous, few exceptions. Accountability, as I said, it's to the board. So if the bank is not doing, and of course mistakes happen. We have 16,000 staff. We have offices in 120 countries. Of course things happen. It's like in the real world and in real life. But we have, and that's I think what is important to recognize, and that we want to use to build trust that has been mentioned here before, is we have an accountability mechanism. Yeah? People can come and complain, and there's an internet, it's under global scrutiny what we do and how we react to it. So the roles of civil society are tremendously important, and of parliament and all the other stakeholders tell us when things go wrong so we can correct it. Maybe I leave it here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's very clear that we are going to need a specific seminar with the World Bank, yes, to explain these issues and to clarify, many of the sometimes, confusion about the role of the bank, like happened with other international organizations. So I think that is important to clarify that. So thank you so much, Mario. And Alan was asking for the floor.
Well, I just wanted to underscore a lot of what we heard from our colleagues at the far end of our panel, and to draw a few preliminary conclusions before you open the debate. 4 quick points, if I may, that I think are quite important. These also strengthen what Mario was saying and what we're seeing on the screen. The first is the importance of institutions. When we're talking about private sector engagement, we're not just talking about engaging companies and investors. We're talking about engaging the whole of society in the way that our colleague from Peru was talking about, in a systemic process. And that they're very much included, civil society, as a key institution of governance in society, to ensure that there are the correct checks and balances, and even in the example that I provided of Zambia, where it's off-grid solar solutions for the most part, there needs to be a regulator to ensure that the quality of those solutions is maintaining what it needs to be. The second very quick one is the incredible importance of partnership and the concept of partnership, finding the right language and mechanisms. Again, the examples we were hearing of the different roles that people are playing in society, and finding the common ground or the synergies, as you were talking about, Paola. One could talk a lot about that, but the critical role of partnership to achieve these multipliers that we're trying to achieve. A third is that in this context, I think we really need to change the appetite for change and the appetite for innovation throughout these systems. We've got to accelerate that, including changing the perception of risk. Certainly while making peace with the past, we have to move forward quickly. And one of those areas is just changing the perception of the private sector about how risky these actions are. In our experience, we discovered that the prices that we set on our guarantees, for example, they're the right prices, but the risk levels that we experience out in the world are lower than anyone expects. That's a very important factor we could come back to. And then finally, just to again underscore, as you were saying, Paulo, the importance of the SDGs. in this process. I think in all of those parts of society we're talking about, the private sector not least, the SDGs provide us with a kind of ethical compass. In addition to the integration that they provide, they provide government, civil society, and the private sector with an orientation to head in the right direction together. One could again speak a lot about that, but I think we should underscore that the SDGs are not just for government. They're not just even for the civil society. The SDGs are also for the private sector, and we need to help them achieve their understanding and implementation of that.
Thank you so much, Alan. In fact, it was one of the things that we were discussing yesterday, how the private sector can really be engaged in the implementation of the SDGs. Yes, in the event that we have yesterday morning on South and private sector, one of the things was that really the private sector is not only a donor but an actor really, which means that also the private sector need to integrate the SDGs even in the core business of the companies, going beyond to the social responsibility or even beyond the idea of the traditional philanthropy. Even if, of course, I know that this is controversial in the sense that we need to define many of the words that I'm using. But in any case, the idea was the discussion yesterday was about how to integrate the SDGs in the core business of the companies. We changed completely the approach and ensure really that the agenda is universal, is for everyone and for all the governments. So I think that, we are in the same page.
And when they do that, when they embrace human rights, when they embrace gender equality, they actually do better on the bottom line.
For sure. That's for sure. And I think that there are evidences about that. So I think that you asked for the floor, Paula.
Yes, Paula. Yeah, of course this has to be real because, of course, not a makeup exercise saying, yes, of course, we are complying with the SDGs. I was mentioning some, percentages of how, also investors say, yes, it's important, but it's also very difficult, so we don't know what to do. So basically, we are now in this situation is very much the case. So we have to make it organic, real, and this is why we say that social dialogue could be really a way to, in that respect. But also, I would like to come back to the issue of the responsibility, since, of course, the governments, the state are stakeholders to the bank, so, of course, governments have a clear responsibility there, but also the bank has also the responsibility for the implementation. So, of course, each one has his own share of tasks in that and of labor in that respect. So, but this is why we also try to put in writing what our criteria should be. So this is a proposal that we want to open up for discussion with the government, and then governments to take it up with DFIs, bilateral but also multilateral DFIs, with investors, with funds, in order really to make the SDGs objective or implemented. And so we try to put together a set of criteria in the context, for example, of the blending, of the blended finance, which should be implemented from the whole spectrum, from the planning, implementation, but also the assessment of results. The results assessment is key in this respect in terms of criteria, and I just mentioned two big areas for us.
In 1 minute?
In 1 minute, less. Decent jobs creation and contribution to income generation at country level and contribution to the creation of domestic capital. So first point, decent job creation based on freedom of association and collective bargaining, living wages, social protection, occupational health and safety. Contribution to income generation, taxes and social contribution, creation of local private sector and local procurement contracts. This is, I think, fully in line with the results of our polling, so tailor support to the needs to the local private sector. This is what we say indeed, how these investments are enhancing the creation of local private sector, how these investments are contributing to the domestic capital through social contribution to paying taxes, and of course how this are contributing to the job creation. There is last point, there is an evaluation of couple of years ago of the European Union, of the European Commission, so not from the trade unions, but the European Commission on the blended finance operation, which says that job creation was one of the least mentioned objectives throughout the analysis of all the blended finance projects. So it's a crucial need if we want really to achieve the SDGs. And would like to reiterate the message that government has a primary responsibility in achieving that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have 2 minutes for the questions and the answers. So, in other cases, maybe we can change more or less the dynamic, but in this particular case, we cannot do that because we are going to have the next session with the Deputy Secretary General and the Minister of Egypt that are coming. Also, our colleague from Sahara Group is here just to close the session. So I propose maybe to have 1 or 2 questions, and maybe we can follow the discussion outside of the room during the coffee break. Okay, so I saw one here and another in the back. Okay. So the micro, our colleague from the European Union.
I had a question too, but I'll ask it outside.
Okay. Thank you for your understanding.
Thank you. Thanks very much for a very interesting discussion. My name is Ernan O'Cleary. I'm from the European Union DevCo. I also, like Paolo, was very struck by the fact that the highest score in the poll is for tailored support to the needs of the local private sector, and I think it does represent a consensus on the importance of local private sector, national and local private sectors, national level firms and smaller firms right down to the local level to the development process in any country. And what I was wondering about was, what does the panel think about what's the balance there? Because obviously, for when you're talking about large amounts of money and large investments, the partners it's easier to deal with tend to be bigger and probably external private sector investors. But of course, those sorts of investments won't resolve the problem of the non-functioning private sector, lack of private entrepreneurial activity within developing countries. So how do you manage the balance between that, and how do you ensure that there is adequate support towards national level and local level private sector? And what is the contribution? You know, we talk about getting from billions to trillions in the big picture of financing for development. Well, what is the contribution that national level and subnational level private sector can play? And actually, a specific question to Alan really is in terms of the Zambia project that you mentioned. Was that targeted on Zambian, or was it possible to target it on Zambian investors and build capacity in Zambian providers in order to, be able to replicate beyond the million? And did it go beyond the provision of equipment and infrastructure and into the operation, maintenance, and further rollout of energy systems? Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay.
Thanks very much. My name's Dean Cooper. I'm working for SNV, the Netherlands Development Organisation. I'm feeling that there's been a lot of very good points made today. I should say my question is for all of the panellists, which I think is the challenge always, to try to see the issues between different groups. I say many good points have been made, but if I'm honest, I think we've probably heard most of it before. The question is, what can we actually do about it? So what are the practical requirements? Now, I've worked previously for the European Commission. I've worked in the United Nations. I've had my own business. So I've seen all sides of the operations when we're trying to do things in developing countries. The impression I get is we often deal with top-down solutions. If we're talking about donor organisations, we've heard about electrification solutions. We hear about trying to bring in technologies into countries and then find markets for these technologies. Whereas I know from business school, the thing that's drilled into your head is what comes first. It's customer, customer, customer. So we have to understand what are the markets in these countries before we start devising all the programs to meet them and the donor contributions. For the private sector, it's a different issue. It's risk. Yeah? Why should the private sector invest in these markets where there's so much uncertainty? The perceived risk, at least, is just too great. We don't know the countries, we don't know the environment, we don't know the policies, we don't know the finances, the tariff structures. How can we address that? I've got other investments I can make without that risk profile. I'm not going to get involved into this. The trick is that we need to bring these two sides together. So the donors with the public money, the relatively small amount of public money, can offset some of the costs for the private sector. But we have to understand local markets, local market development, and that's the range. That is including the policy frameworks, not just the technologies, the financing structures. So for me, the question to everybody is, how can we bring the sides together? So it's the public donors, the private operators, and the local stakeholders. Because we often operate at this international level without any real understanding of what is going on in these countries. This is an issue that SNV is obviously dealing with constantly. But I'd be very interested to hear from the panelists. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think that all the questions, both of them, are probably the theme for the next dialogue that maybe we can have here. What I'm going to suggest is that maybe because you're really asking to all the panelists, and you are asking a very specific question, the second one, to the World Bank. So what I'm going to suggest, if you don't mind, is to have this conversation outside of the room. But the only thing that I would like to say before we close is that I think that it's important in this conversation to remind that the center is the human being. I don't think that it is a good idea to talk sometimes about only markets or clients, which of course we need it, but the point is to have the human being in the center of the agenda. I think that this is a very important thing. The second point is, I'm talking now from the side of the global partnership. The second point is that I think that is very clear from the poll that we already did this morning that the national ownership is still the priority. And the national needs, in this particular case, the national needs of the private sector, but also the collaboration among all the actors to implement the projects at the country level. So the human being, the national needs and the national ownership. And then just only to say that one of the goals of these conversations is just to prepare the principles that the global partnerships is going to launch and to present during the high-level political forum in July in New York. So all the things that we were discussing during these 2 days related to the private sector, how to integrate gender, how to integrate South on South, we are trying to put everything together in order to have a specific thing, which I don't think that is going to fix all the problems, but at least is going to help to have specific principles for the private sector and then a follow-up about how to implement these principles in the field. So I'm really so sorry that we don't have more time to discuss. The only thing that I wanted to do before we finish, because in the following panel we are going to have the DSG, and I'm not going to be in the panel, but just since the global partnership is in my division, I would like to use this chance to really thanks to all the team that I think that did an incredible job in order to prepare all the panels, including the following one. So thanks a lot to all of you, and a very big applause for them. So I think... Yeah.
Thank you, Paloma. We are breaking for coffee for about 20-25 minutes and resuming at 11:30. À tout à l'heure.
Wonderful facility. Super, merci. Alors.
ready? I'm ready to go. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the closing session of our very interesting and very stimulating day and a half, almost 2 days, of Specialized Policy Dialogue. I'm Janet Longmore. I'm the CEO of Digital Opportunity Trust. I am the moderator for this morning, and I am also Canada's representative to the Business Leaders Caucus. And we have heard about the role of the Business Leaders Caucus in supporting the work of the GPEDC, and we have been meeting over the course of yesterday and today as well. So I'm pleased to be here representing Canada, representing the Business Leaders Caucus, and representing the social enterprise sector through my work with Digital Opportunity Trust. I want to also acknowledge and recognize the support of Germany in the development of the Business Leaders Caucus and the commitment to how we effectively engage the private sector in effective development. We are also supported by a joint support team with OECD and UNDP, and they have been very tremendous in helping shape this work we're doing towards ideas for guiding principles for effective engagement of the private sector in effective development. They are also supporting a working group that we've heard about who has been working for 2 years, analyzing cases, bringing the issues to the table. So an extensive amount of work has been done with the GPEDC. And so we're at a wonderful moment right now, a milestone where we want to hear from our panelists about these ideas and emerging principles. We'll have a poll later on as well for all of you to engage with us in that. And the principles are really addressing what we have been hearing over the past 2 days. Trust. How do we reach the furthest left behind? How do we share and assess risk? The importance of engaging community, the importance of the voices of women and young people. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. I have to my right, Uta Bulhoff, who we've met before on a panel, the Deputy Director General for the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development for Germany. Pearl Uzokwe, who is the Director of Governance and Sustainability for the Sahara Group in Nigeria. Her Excellency, Dr. Suha Nasser, who is the Minister of Investment and International Cooperation in Egypt. I find that fascinating, investment and international cooperation coming together. I think that's quite unique. And Vitalis Meja, who is the co-chair of the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. He is also the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the GPEDC. We will be joined later for closing remarks by Masamichi Kono, the Deputy Secretary General of OECD. So I'd like to start off with asking Uta, who was with our Business Leaders Caucus over the course of the past 2 days. We are a very diverse group. We're a group that is global. It represents social enterprise, CEOs, young entrepreneurs, private sector alliances, the cooperative movement. So a number of very interesting business models that have been working in development with that overarching goal of ensuring effective development impact and improving lives for people everywhere. And we pulled together a statement, as I mentioned earlier, and I'd like to ask Uta to speak to that.
Thanks a lot, and great to have this so prominently here in the conference presented. Let me start, before coming then directly to the statement itself, to once again thank the business leaders to spend so much time and to really engage. I must say this has been a wonderful journey, and the journey is of course not at the end. We are aiming to have the senior level meeting in summer, and this is going to be back to back with a high level meeting of the UN. And I must say, what is driving us is very much not just the belief that the private sector has to bring so much to the table in driving that effectiveness. We also, from the many mistakes that we did in the past of not bringing every stakeholder to the table, we've learned a lot. And we don't want to make the same mistakes again to do negotiations on behalf of a third party that we did. So it's great to foster this and to nourish this also, from a ministry part. And that's why I'm so glad that, we had this productive discussion. And you have all seen the statement that has been distributed yesterday, even a bit further deepened now with principles that have been developed. And, I must say, if you look at the statement, you might say it's not rocket science. But I think it's so important to get the key principles out, to get the alignment here, to get the private sector voice very prominently. And if I may say, the entire group, of course, having a global variety, having a variety, as Janet says, on, small businesses, large businesses, union representatives there, is unique in formulating such things. And there was a true support for getting the Agenda 2030 realized, and really about creating jobs. That is so important today, creating jobs through increasing productivity, driving innovation, and ensuring inclusive growth. So these were like topics all around. When it came to things that, I would like to highlight, that might have been also not so prominently discussed in the past in, let's say, the development scene. This was very much about, and it has come across here many times, the trust building. The trust building was an item that has been largely discussed that really needs to be increased, the trust-based building on the local level with all stakeholders to really engage the private sector. And I think, partner countries, donors, but then also, NGOs that really need to come together and discuss it. Then secondly, to also foster this inclusive dialogue on the ground, right? To really be open, engaged on the national level. We also had a panel on risk, and I just don't want to reframe everything, but I think the de-risking was a key theme. And not just, in terms of, what's the interest rate. It was rather the risk that a company needs to take in a respective country. So it might be about land rights, things like that. And that is also, where partner countries and everybody as a stakeholder needs to closely think how we can manage this even better. Then also, I'd like to point out the data, the importance of data. We have heard it many times, you can only manage what you measure, and I think that has been also a very strong push from the private sector group that has been discussing. I think that is a lot, what they brought to the table that was highlighted, and I think it was in particular highlighted in the sense of you need the data to then be able to identify how to scale projects quickly, what projects to scale quickly, to scale the right projects. But we also have been cautious because many times, when we look at the Agenda 2030, if you only would go for pure data, then we would neglect, the externalities, and we really have to also give a value to the externalities, and to collect that data. And, there are good initiatives out, and we just have to make this also a priority with all the stakeholders. And this have been, I think, to my mind, very much kind of the highlights that have been discussed in the group. Of course, the work is not yet over, and we're very much looking forward to an engaged debate with all and everybody, and of course, all the wisdom that is in this room today. Thank you.
Thank you, Uta. And exactly right. This is very much a work in progress. And if you have a chance to get a copy of the statement, to have a chance to look through it. It was really written in the spirit of learning, of being open, of engaging. You know, how do we collaborate effectively together, all stakeholders, so that there is an openness as we move forward. Yes, we want to get concrete for July at the high-level political forum with the principles, but this is a work in progress, and I think our panelists will be contributing to some of the ideas around the principles as well. At some point soon, the poll will go up, and what you will see are the ideas for principles for engaging the private sector in effective development. We'd like you to rate them, prioritize them. Your input and ideas will be extremely helpful. It is a work in progress, so it will come back to the working group on private sector engagement and to the Business Leaders Caucus. So it's up right now, so we will continue with our panelists. But please do take a moment to look at these and to share your priorities. I'd like to turn to Pearl now, and really for all the panelists, as we're thinking, the guiding principles, the need for something like that. This is new, this is innovative. So in your experiences, how might that have helped in building effective partnerships with the private sector and with all stakeholders, and also to share your reflections on some of the opportunities and the challenges. So really, if we can dig into those real examples from the corporate sector, you know, from your ministry, from civil society, that would, I think, really help us as all really see where these principles, how they might fit and how we need to shape them more so. Pearl.
Thank you very much, Janet, and I am very excited to be here as a representative of one of the private sector companies. And the first thing that I will say is the private sector, I know that we have talked about it a lot over the past few days. It isn't one homogeneous unit. I will be representing one of those private sector companies, a company called Sahara Group, which is Nigerian-owned, but operating out of 38 countries across the world. We've got Africa, Asia, the Middle East. And the reason that I say this is that it puts us in a pretty vantage position because there are not a lot of companies in our position. What we have started to see over the past few years is that the societal issues that we come across in these various countries have a commonality to it. And what we're trying to do now is essentially come together. And I will give you one of the examples that we have come across and one of the things that we're doing in Nigeria following on with our relationship with the United Nations. So Janet, 3 years ago, a Sahara Group partnered with the United Nations and we started a group called the Private Sector Advisory Group. It's come down to Nigeria and Sahara Group has basically led the discussions. We currently have about 17 members in that group, and as a practical example, it's been very effective in getting the private sector to come together and essentially work through what it is they want to achieve. I think it's really important to stress that corporate social responsibility isn't new for the private sector, but what we're starting to see is better alignment of the corporate social responsibility and sustainability as far as that's concerned. We have, at present, started working on a particular project called the Sustainability Toolkit. And yeah, so I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's something that we're looking to launch in the next month. Sahara Group. So Sahara Group is basically leading the charge as far as that's concerned. What we have seen over the years is that a lot of the private sector companies are willing to actually participate, but they just need better alignment. And what we're doing within these groups is helping with better alignment.
Are you also finding that CSR as a whole is evolving, in that companies are really looking at their purpose and purpose-led companies? And so the concept of CSR, which may sit on the sidelines of an overall corporate business strategy, is evolving, and it's integrated into your overall strategy, but also into your overall purpose of why you exist and for what.
That's a very good question. I think that what we're starting to see is there is a gradual paradigm shift, essentially, in the way businesses are looking at carrying on their operations. Most businesses are no longer interested in operating solely for revenue generation. What we're starting to see is that societal issues are actually business issues. And you will see, I know that we've had a couple of people speak over the past few days of a potential conflict between profit making and sustainability. And I would like to challenge that to some extent, because what we're starting to see for a lot of businesses that we come across on a multinational level is that we are able to work towards better alignment of these sustainable goals and including them in our business models. This does not mean that you're compromising profit revenue generation for sustainability, but you're actually starting to see that where you consider these factors and these societal factors in creating your business models, you're basically ensuring that there's sustainability for the company. Sustainability for us essentially just means continuity, and continuity is something that is vital for any business regardless of the industry that they're operating out of.
Great, wonderful, thank you very much. Your Excellency, we would love to hear from you on challenges and opportunities, principles that might have helped around risk sharing, trust, inclusive dialogue, and your experience in the unique new ministry that you are leading.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jeanette, and thank you for having me on your panel with the distinguished speakers. I here want to reflect on some of the principles we've heard from Ota and what you've also presented in your opening speech. I think as a representative from the government, we are very committed, and we believe that we can only grow in an inclusive manner and create jobs and enhance productivity in partnership with the private sector. That's something that we have acknowledged. It's very clearly stipulated in the government's program that was presented and discussed and endorsed by the parliament. And we've worked on various fronts that I will highlight very quickly. Number one of the principles highlighted there is country's ownership of the program. And I think from experience, only homegrown reform programs succeed in a sustainable manner. And we're saying, when we say homegrown, it's not a program that is drafted by the government or implemented by the government. In fact, it is a program that is designed in consultation with all stakeholders. Obviously, the private sector is one of the main key stakeholders, but also the civil society and NGOs that have been playing a very active role in Egypt. So this is how we put the program. And then implementation, again, is done in partnership. And here, development partners, because you've highlighted the ministry, and that's very true. In fact, initially I was Minister of International Cooperation, and hence the main interlocutor with international financial institutions, including Germany, including OECD, and the World Bank, IFC, and many others. But the investment is here. My main interlocutor and my main client is the private sector and investment. And this is where the interlink, and I want to refer to some hybrid, because now when we negotiate, for example, with GIZ, and what I managed to lobby for is the grant or the funding that comes from the bilaterals, all the international needs to be linked with the private sector work. So if we're having a Siemens project, we want to make sure that the TA is earmarked to capacity building, bringing in innovation, knowledge, and technology from Germany. Same with all the other bilaterals. We're here in France. We will be having a presidential visit very soon, and that's what we're currently also discussing while I'm here in Paris. So I think the development partners here, including OECD, play a very important role, and you as chairing the caucus, I think you have a very important role to play in that perspective, is on home country ownership of the program and putting that on the agenda of international financial institutions, because that is the way to ensure sustainability and success of the program. So listening to all stakeholders, and this is, I think, one excellent platform that you've been having for the last 3 days, which I'm sure will feed in on the final principle. CSR, we made it very clear that in the new investment law that was issued almost a year now, that CSR is 10% tax exemption. And that is also an incentive and an encouragement for the private sector to also not only create jobs and promote, enhance productivity or promote innovation, but also to play a very important social role, especially in lagging region, in governorates in Egypt, like in Upper Egypt, where we have high incidence of poverty, and hence we know that the government needs the private sector to come in. So these are the main points I wanted to highlight, but maybe just a reflection on hybrid, and that's again where we can work together, is we have in Egypt, in Upper Egypt, Bimban, which is the largest solar plant worldwide, and that is done in partnership. So even IFIs here not only provided loans to the Egyptian government, but they also provided long-term funding to the private sector. And hence we have an excellent public-private partnership in one of the poorest governorate, creating jobs, but also allowing Egypt to have renewable energy and export this energy to neighboring African countries. And that's an important target that we're having, as Egypt will be chairing African Union within the coming few days. And hence, President Sisi is giving also, when we're talking about lagging region, it's not only lagging region within our own country, but our continent and global. Thank you very much, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And yes, congratulations. The chairing of the African Union is imminent for Egypt. And I
count on your support.
Yeah. And I'm quite interested again in the linkage between investment and international cooperation. At the G7 meetings that were hosted by Canada, it was the first ever time where finance ministers came together with international cooperation ministers, even ministers beyond the G7 and the Kananaskis meetings, and declarations came out from there, which Whistler, not Kananaskis, Whistler Declaration. So it's an emerging trend. And maybe if you could just speak a little bit more to, I know you touched on this, but the innovative business models that you're seeing with, the financing coming, a German company, I was there when Siemens was talking about the work that they're doing in Egypt, but then also how that gets integrated into that community level, into the local ownership.
The main thrust of this program is it was really done in consultation with the community there. They had extensive discussions from the Egyptian side, but also from our bilateral partner, Germany, from that front, because in the past, support from bilateral countries was done on an ad hoc basis, but not done in a package. And I think what we want to try to achieve now is an integrated development package, because that is the only way to ensure sustainability of development. Agreed. When we used to have piecemeal technical assistance here and there scattered between the different governorates or villages, it was not impactful enough. Yeah. And remember, you've also highlighted an important point in your opening statement, which is impact investment. There's not any investment that you want in, that's not all the investment that you want to really attract, but you want investment that will really create jobs, because, Egypt and Africa, per se, we have a very young and growing population. It's a bit different from Europe. So we have a major challenge in creating jobs for young people and for women specifically. So I'm actually happy sitting on this panel where we have... That's not the typical panel, by the way. Thank you very much,
Thank
Janet.
you.
I'm looking forward to working together moving forward.
Yes,
Great.
indeed. Okay, thank you very
Janet,
much.
So if you don't mind, I would just like to add to what Her Excellency has said about collaboration and measurement and impact.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so from the private sector perspective, what I had tried to say earlier was that as much as this is not new to the private sector, what we're starting to see, and the beauty of having principles that are outlined, is that it helps with just coordination and proper, better alignment. So if I speak for Sahara Group in Nigeria as an example, with the private sector advisory group that was set up, and this was with Sahara taking the lead as the chair of the group, following on from the general PSAG that is at the UN level. We have come together with 5 other private sector companies, and we have general leaders, people from civil society. We have businesses like the Lagos Business School as part of the group. And what we're doing is looking at the different CSR initiatives taken by the companies and then arranging them into clusters so that they better meet the SDGs. So at present, we have 10 separate clusters, because I think it's important that we give practical examples of how this is working out on country level. So within the PSAG, which has 17 members, we have 10 cluster groups, and we've decided that we're going to work very hard towards alignment with the SDGs and achievement. But like I was saying at the beginning, the private sector isn't just one organization. And because it isn't one organization, we recognize that. And within the clusters, so everyone is given a task depending on their area, focus area. So we have businesses that are focused on telecommunications. We have those who are in the agribusiness, and they come together and start working on initiatives that can then be drilled down. So we found that that's very effective. And the next thing that we've done is we started working on measurements, because it's not enough to just do these things, but we need to have baseline measurements done first of all, and then impact measurement. And as part of PSAG, what we have done is we've come up with a toolkit working with one of our partners, which is PwC, for example. And that's going to be rolled out very soon. But we didn't do this in isolation. We did this with a specific office opened up in Nigeria called the Office of the Senior Special Advisor to the President on SDGs. And I know that His Excellency from the Dominican Republic had spoken about this yesterday, which is essentially getting alignment of the SDGs on a national level. So if we speak about one of the challenges that we have as a private sector, where it's great that we're doing this, it's great that we're getting businesses who were traditionally doing this to get better aligned. But one of the challenges that we have is we need continuity from the government's perspective. So if you look at a country like Nigeria, we hope that at the end of this tenure, when we have elections coming up this year, you want to ensure that with the next government, all the hard work that's been put into it does not get thrown away. Exactly. So I would say continuity is one of the challenges. Another project that we've done in Nigeria, which has been very helpful, is that it's called the Food Africa Project, and Zahara spearheading. I believe that it's probably the first collaboration of its kind in Nigeria. So we've had the United Nations come together. We have the various, we have private sector ourselves. We have Rocco Brothers, who are celebrity chefs. We have the Kaduna State government, which is one of the governments in the northern part of Nigeria, come together, and we're working on an agri-business project, which is looking at integration within the food value chain. We're looking at a project that will hopefully impact up to 500,000 lives. At the moment, 350 farmers have been shortlisted in Nigeria. We're going to be building an essential organizing unit that will be completed within the second quarter. You're hoping to get. So it's beautiful to see the synergies that basically arise when everybody from the different sectors come together. And I think it's important that we start looking at ourselves as partners and building on all our different strengths.
Thank you. Thank you. These are very powerful examples, and again, reinforcing the ownership at the country level and engaging with communities. Vitalis, I'd like to turn to you. We see some of the poll results are coming up. These, again, are ideas for principles, but would love to hear from you and your perspective. We heard you speak yesterday, and I really liked your mindset shift and the openness and seeing what the possibilities are when we bring together such diverse actors to focus on effective development and development impact for people. So if you could speak to how you might see these guiding principles being effective, and what more might be required in terms of actions, or your thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. And I must say I'm excited about what I'm seeing in the world already, and they are very much in line with some of the ideas that we have. First of all, let me also join in indeed congratulating the Joint Support Team and the government of Germany for sponsoring this first dialogue. I think it's a very important one, and given that it brings on board all the stakeholders to share their views on how we want private sector to engage with this process, because it has taken us very many years to get here. And I think it's a positive thing going forward. And I think for me, these are very interesting times. Sometimes back we were saying that SDGs make us move from business as usual to business unusual. And that's why I'm saying that these are very unusual times. And the fact that indeed we can have private sector dialogue with everybody else on the need to be partners and engage in development is something refreshing. But I think for us, and also building on what we've had since yesterday, one of the things that we need to think about is creating enabling conditions, not as such, not really about enabling environment, but enabling conditions that can allow for private sector and other actors facilitate this kind of investment or this kind of development investment going forward. And in that context, I think some of the things we've already highlighted them. That has to do with first the issue of the mindset. And in that mindset, I think key ingredients come in. We need to ask ourselves what kind of systems and procedures do we need to put in place, indeed, to allow for private sector to engage. What kind of the legal framework is required for that to happen? Because we cannot expect this new mode of operation to engage and continue exist, thriving on the public financial systems, the legal framework, the regulatory framework, as it were, as it exists now. We really have to change a couple of things. And therein comes the role of Parliament. How do they feel and engage with this? I know yesterday we had Parliament represented here, but I think it's very important going forward. And if we are to borrow from what Her Excellency said, that can there be, are we thinking about tax incentives not towards investment, but towards development projects? Is there something that is really viable going forward? And I think also one of the things that I think we talked about yesterday, which I found very interesting, is that instead of talking about inclusive dialogue, why don't we talk about inclusive partnership? Because it is a partnership that becomes the driving instrument for dialogue. It is the partnership that becomes the driving motive for private sector engagement and for solving any problem, because we are partners. But if you're just dialoguing, well, people talk. In Africa we like talking, and we talk a lot. But so I think we really have to think about that. But a couple of things along the lines of what you say that I need to look into also. For me, for this to work, for these principles indeed to be implemented and to be taken forward, 4 key elements have to be considered. The first one, and this we really have to think about all of us inwardly. What will be the cost of investing in creating conditions for private sector to engage in development? And can we live with that? Can we deal with that? Because it is not going to be free, it is not going to be cheap, and it is not going to be favorable. We will all have to pinch ourselves and agree that this is what we want to do in order to get somewhere. And that's why I said it's going to be business unusual. A second thing is trying to understand the needs of private sector in development. So I'm not talking about a business case for private sector in development, but really private sector seeing itself as a stakeholder, as an ally that wants and feels that they also have a responsibility in development. So have we understood those needs? Or do we need to do more? And in that, it's not something that technocrats sit down, civil society and government do. No, but this is a dialogue that we must really have with the private sector themselves. To the extent that they also move out of their comfort zone and really have a discussion around beyond CSRs and everything, that this planet belongs to all of us. What do we need to do different? What do we need to do separately to change things the way we do? The third issue is the cost of incentives to create the demand for private sector to engage. I think we've just had an excellent example from Egypt on the issue of tax incentives for those who want to invest in corporate social responsibility. What about if we expanded that to those who want to engage in development affairs, like the example we had from Cameroon yesterday on private sector engaging farmers on plantain? How much would that cost? What kind of incentives can we give to them? And what is the role of Parliament in that context? I think the last issue for me is the structures and policy framework to promote this new engagement. Because we cannot just have this discussion here and hope that it translates into miracles at the national level. Now, things will have to, yes, inform the technocrats here about the new changes, but then they themselves have to really have a serious buy-in in this issue. And they have to think about what kind of institutions, what kind of policies, what kind of legal framework is needed to facilitate this kind of engagement. Otherwise, it will still just remain business as usual. In that context, I think government leadership is very important. Government leadership particularly is important in creating the relevant structures to bring all stakeholders on board, to manage the process, to manage the tension that will exist across and between all the stakeholders, the Parliament's role in setting up the right legal framework, but also I think it is very, very important that we also include the civil society, who are the custodian of the citizen aspirations and community aspirations and values with regard to the issues of development. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Very powerful and passionate. And we also had lengthy discussions about systems change and frameworks that do not exist when we're, and how can we put in place frameworks that support these innovative collaborations, because we are taking a different approach and we are engaging all. And what might have worked 20, 30 years ago, things need to change. And the institutions, the political will, the leadership, all of these are critical factors and very, very important. The role clarity, I think you touched on that as well. And so that's something that we're still looking at, clarity of roles, where we have our expertise and how do we leverage each other's expertise. Uta, I'm wondering if you can speak. Pearl touched on the importance of the data and measuring. You talked about measuring what you manage. And, it said that the private sector, is committed to this. Our case studies showed some variances there, and there's opportunities to co-create how we're measuring, within that stakeholder group. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, please, in light of it as an emerging idea for our principles. Thank you.
If I may first, take one response to my colleague to the left. If I recall, the very lively debate we had in our business leaders group, I must say that, there's a true commitment on the private sector itself, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say every person being in the private sector, being it a CEO, is also part of the society, right? And so it's not like good and bad, and there might be some, evil exploiting companies, we all know it, but, as you very lively said, there is a clear will, and this was also very present in the group that, I was co-chairing yesterday, the true commitment to lead and to support women and the youth. Mm-hmm. And to support women was just in particular because they often, or it's shown, they just manage it better, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just pure because we want to help the women to empower them, but because we know that the outcome might be better, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. So that I think is a very, that's a great win-win situation actually, and that I think is to be noted here. On the terms of data, and I think it's interesting to see that it worked out here also one quite prominently. I think what is important, and my colleague from Egypt mentioned it, that we have to move to this integrated development packages, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there the private sector is very open to really think about how should we measure it and what and data is needed to then regularly monitor it. But that's really an ongoing debate, and I think that's not an easy debate. Yeah. Also, with the different interests that you have in the organizations. But as I earlier said, I think it's important to also be frank on how do we judge externalities. How do we value them? If we don't value, social impact, then it won't happen, right? So that's important to set the right conditions here. and that is kind of the prerequisite that then the private sector can also work accordingly. But I'd like to say we're all in the same boat here, and we can only win it together. And I think that was very much also the spirit of the Business Leaders Group.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, that's very positive and exactly what it was, and how I think we all should be very much. Thank you.
Okay, no, I just
yes,
wanted to
Pearl,
add
you've got something before I go to
I
the
just
floor.
wanted to add one more thing to what Vitalis had said. I think for the private sector, the truth is, like I said, I can't speak for everyone, but what we're starting to see from our position is this, I would say a gradual paradigm shift, is the cost of ignoring societal issues is actually too expensive. I think that for any business that is thinking seriously about this, you cannot afford to carry on doing business the way that you were doing it in the past. I think that there's definitely a concerted effort to be more intentional about what they do. And I just believe that with time, you will start to see, because these changes don't happen automatically. Trust isn't built automatically. We've talked about over the past few days. And I think it's important that we just stress that. If I give an example, when you talk about sustainability, efficient use of resources, when I try to say that there isn't necessarily a conflict between sustainability and revenue generation, you start to use your resources more efficiently. That immediately, it translates to cost savings. Which business is not going to want to be interested in that? So I think it's the case of just ensuring that when we start communicating with the private sector, we just look at ways of aligning these SDGs to ensure that it makes sense for everybody. And from where we're standing, we can see that it will make sense. So we're looking at it, there's definitely a positive response from the private sector that we're involved in achieving these SDGs.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to go to the floor. Is there any other short comments from our panelists before I do that, or shall we open it up? Thank you. If you could please state your name and organization and then your question, please. Yes, right here. The microphones should be coming.
Hello, thank you. My name is Rochelle, and I represent the Ecumenical Institute for Labor Education and Research, a non-government organization for workers in the Philippines, also part of the CPDE delegation. I'd like to build up a little bit on what Vitalis has mentioned earlier in speaking of going beyond CSR. The concrete reality is that some of the private sector, and I say this with a grain of salt, is more powerful than the state. And they can shape the policy landscape, and whereas CSR remains to be largely a voluntary mechanism for the private sector. So Uta mentioned something about true commitment from private sector. I'd like to hear more on how do we ensure private sector's due diligence and compliance to existing conventions and declarations of people's rights, which goes beyond CSR. And secondly, and lastly, Pearl mentioned about gradual paradigm shift, and we're entering also, in the past few days we've been discussing this, we're entering the digital economy, and Germany, as a pioneer of Industry 4.0, a national strategic initiative for development, I'd like to also ask on how can private sector engagement contribute to just transition with inclusivity at its core. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we'll take one here from this gentleman in this second row. Oh, sorry.
Oui.
Okay, and then we'll come to you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Je crois que toujours en suivant Monsieur Vitalis, je voudrais me réjouir des points que vous avez notés à l'issue de vos délibérations. Ce point me paraît extrêmement important. Faire les choses autrement, penser autrement et agir autrement. Je partage parfaitement cette résolution. Par contre, je ne sais pas si c'est la traduction qui pose problème, je voudrais plus d'explications, plus de détails sur le point suivant, celui de comprendre le besoin du secteur privé en matière de développement. Comprendre le besoin du secteur privé, c'est ce que j'ai noté de la traduction. Comprendre le besoin du secteur privé, que l'État comprenne le besoin du secteur privé, ça me pose problème. Et tout au long des travaux, il y a cette question que je rumine et que je pose à tout le monde. De quel secteur privé parlons-nous? De quel secteur privé parlons-nous? Aujourd'hui, jusqu'à nos habillements, c'est le secteur privé qui nous impose ça. Nous sommes tous accros, tout le monde a son smartphone, le téléphone en main. C'est le secteur privé qui nous impose la conduite à tenir aujourd'hui. La résistance est difficile. La résistance est difficile. La France est en train de réfléchir à une nouvelle forme de la démocratie. De quel secteur privé parlons-nous? Donc, c'est extrêmement important. Merci.
Okay, thank you. Merci. We have someone here in the second row, please.
I represent the Independent Accountability Panel of the United Nations Secretary General, and we published the report on private sector and accountability. And the question is very simple: how the governments and the private sector, who are now sitting in front of us, see the accountability. And I want to emphasize that sometimes during this two-day discussion, people think accountability as monitoring and evaluation or more control, but they don't see the mainly accountability as a whole framework. And I would like to see your vision and your understanding of accountability. It will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We can take one more, I think, please. Yes.
Sí. Bueno, felicitar a las exposiciones porque yo creo que han sido muy interesantes. Y yo creo que hay tres conceptos que están íntimamente relacionados y que son conceptos, a nuestro modo de ver, iluminadores del tema que estamos tratando. Lo que hemos visto desde ayer hasta hoy, que la matriz fundamental que buscamos es el factor confianza, ¿no? Para que el sector privado, y no solo el sector privado, sino todos los sectores del desarrollo participen en él. Pero creo que este panel ha dado, repito, tres ideas fundamentales en este tema para la creación de confianza. Uno, que tiene que ver, que me parece que ha sido fundamental lo que ha dicho el señor Vitalis, que es el costo de participación y el costo de los incentivos. Pero la ministra de Egipto ha presentado el tema de poder en la inversión, en los socios bilaterales, dejar innovación en el territorio, en los actores locales, ¿no? Y el PER del Grupo Sahara ha planteado la relación entre empresa y sostenibilidad. Me parece que esos son tres matrices importantes para poder crear la confianza que se ha venido planteando desde el día de ayer en cada uno de los paneles, ¿no? Y yo la pregunta que tengo, quizás la puedan contestar cada uno, si unimos estos tres conceptos, ¿cómo eso pudiesen ser tres matrices fundamentales del diálogo entre el sector público y el sector privado, pero no solamente eso, sino también con las comunidades donde se origina la inversión?
Merci, thank you. I think these are excellent questions, and so I'd like to turn to our panelists and questions around accountability, the trust matrix, going beyond CSR. How do we ensure due diligence? What's the gradual paradigm shift? Acting differently. What private sector are we really talking about? So. Your Excellency, may I turn to you for your comments on one or two?
I will start with the accountability.
The accountability, thank you.
Because
okay.
I think one of the principles here highlights access to data and information. And I think without access to data, timely, accurate data and information, then accountability won't be really achieved in a prudent manner. So that's a prerequisite, I think, for any policymaker, even for the private sector, to do an informed business decision, or even to select which development project you really want to finance or allocate your funding from the CSR. So accountability is important. I would put accountability first for governments, not because I represent the government. I think accountability, and going back to my colleague's point on parliaments, I think parliamentarians, in order to be able to assess where the government's program stands in terms of implementation and delivery to the citizens, it is very important that you have a clear, solid governance structure, very transparent system, and where the policymakers and governments are accountable and responsible to deliver. And obviously that is also important in terms of also more data for the private sector, because you often have government that posts data, but you also getting aggregated data or sectoral data from the private sector is often a bit more challenging, especially in countries such as developing economies, where you have the large share of the private sector as small, medium, or micro, or even informal sector, where you hardly have any data. So I just want to stress that's very important, and hence also we want to reach out for more support on getting accurate and timely data for accountability and good governance. And this is where I want to stop. Thank you. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Pearl, have you got a statement on accountability if we address the private sector and heard the government side?
Well, yes, I do. I think, again, and that's why I think it's really important that we have discussions like this where everyone is just able to contribute their bit. For the private sector, we're just starting to see a lot more, I would say, self-governance. So if you think about it, for a lot of the private sector, or those operating on a multinational level, you have to raise funding. If you have to raise funding, there are levels that you have to meet, and these are usually quite high. We have members of the World Bank here, for example. Governance levels are incredibly high. So even before we get to the level of implementing SDGs, I think we're already self-governing ourselves and ensuring that we have in place these processes to elevate our status and to ensure that we access, for example, finance. And so we are doing it on our own. But one of the suggestions that I would say is when it comes to working together collaboratively, the government has a place, has a contribution to make in this regard, and that would be from a regulatory and a legislative perspective. Of course, it helps when the government is able to set out what it is they expect the different companies to meet, what standards they expect the companies to meet. So, yes, we're doing it on our own, but I think regulation and legislation would help as well.
Great, thank you, thank you. Vitalis, is there a question that sparked your interest?
Yes, sure. No, thank you very much. I also agree that indeed accountability should be a modus operandi. It's actually a way of measuring impact. Mm-hmm. So from our perspective, we don't see this as just a process or an exercise in itself, or as an end in itself, but must be part and parcel of the engagement. It must be part and parcel of development planning, implementation, and the overall assessment of impact. So in that context, I think accountability becomes a very important tool, not just for governments, but also for private sector themselves in their own initiatives going forward. With regards to the needs of private sector, I think yesterday we highlighted a couple of things that we feel private sector indeed brings to the table. One has to do with the issue of innovation, technology, the issue of competency that they can bring to help facilitate service delivery or improve service delivery, and also in pushing down the costs of living, particularly for the poor. That is something they can do, and really try to make it bearable for the general population to feel that this planet really belongs to all of us. I think the other thing, and particularly those who work in a marginalized area, are particularly concerned about the issue of environmental conservation, especially where big companies are involved, and especially in the extractives. So the question is, where governments don't have the capacity to monitor or hold them accountable, can they themselves behave? So, and that's why we are saying that we shouldn't look at this private sector engagement in terms of a business case, but we should look at it in the context that this planet belongs to all of us. We are all responsible citizens. Before you became a company, you are a citizen, isn't it? And you also have a responsibility to protect your own environment, or to play your own diligent role as a responsible citizen. And what we are saying that, yes, now you are a company, continue playing that role. And the question now is, how then do we as a country sit down and discuss, there's this development problem, there's this development challenge. What role can you play as a major actor in development to address this challenge? And it doesn't necessarily mean, like my friend Fred was saying yesterday, it doesn't necessarily mean that when we are having that discussion, the issue is about tax incentives or revenues that you might get out of it, but rather, what can you contribute to help bring sustainability, like my colleague from Sahara Group was saying. So in that context, I think we really have to think about the issue of ownership. And I think that's the point we had from the Dominican Republic, that ownership is not just about just few stakeholders sitting around the table and agreeing on practicalities and measure and steps. But you must remember that the end result or the end game is to the citizens, is to the communities who need to be the larger stakeholders, not beneficiaries, larger stakeholders in all this agenda. And in that context, we really have to design mechanisms or tools and structures to mobilize their participation, mobilize their engagement, not just in collecting their views on what is important or what they think is priority, but mobilize them to become key actors, key stakeholders in whatever development plans or projects we're initiating.
Right, thank you very much. And clearly ensuring country ownership and recognizing local values and expertise has come out on top in the poll. Uta, some brief comments to one of the, perhaps one of the questions that you would choose, and then we have a closing remarks to come.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to pick up on that question that was on human rights and labor rights, because I think that is exactly, when we have this inclusive dialogue or partnership on the ground, which is essential to be addressed, under what circumstances do we want to get the production going, leveraging all innovation that's available. And I can just recall from, an own example, when the ministry is doing its work in the textile business or in the cacao business, it's super essential to really agree with the different stakeholders, and the NGO scene is super helpful there to agree, what is then the metric that we want to measure, and it's not just, how much do you produce, but it's exactly what progress do you make on the externalities, how do you progress on, the ecological side, on the women's progress they can make. So I think that's super important, and that was mentioned also very largely by the group yesterday. You really have to make the social impact measurable and put it on the table. Then it becomes part of the equation. I don't want to. I would also like to hound everybody in the group accountable. It's in the end, for many products also what the consumer decides, right? And really, how many times do we just go for the low-cost shirt, right? Or the low-cost chocolate? I mean, everything has a price, right? I think we can encourage these discussions, and we need to, and I think the private sector by and large, is ready to do that, to take the social responsibility, but it's also then the civil society that really then has to make the choice to buy the sustainable chocolate, to buy the sustainable shirts, right, and not then go to the low-cost, not to name anybody, I think we know them all, but to make that right choice, right? So it's just it's just both sides that need to be considered here.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very strong points, Uta. I actually work every day with large numbers of young people, and I am very encouraged and inspired by their commitment to humanism, to empathy, to holding corporations accountable, holding themselves accountable. And so I think we can be inspired by a generation which is here with us now that is taking a fundamentally different approach, and I think that's really important. Yes, shifting paradigms. I want to thank the panelists all very, very much, and thank everyone in the room as well. You've given us some great ideas for these, or great values that you've placed on the emerging principles. Your insights and shared experiences have been extremely, extremely helpful. And we're set for work still to be done. Thanks again to OECD and UNDP, who will support the Business Leaders Caucus going forward. And now it is my honor to introduce Masamichi Kono, who is the Deputy Secretary General of OECD, and he will provide us some closing remarks. Thank you all very much.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased to join you today for the closing of what has been a truly rich and lively dialogue on private sector engagement. My Secretary General, Mr. Angel Gria, would have liked to be here. He excuses himself for not being able to come, but I'm sure he would have liked to be part of the discussion today. Your discussions have really demonstrated the importance of effective partnerships between the public and private sectors across all stakeholders to reach sustainable development goals and the need to mobilize the stakeholders. But then we also know, of course, that there are no easy solutions, especially when different partners are working together. We have different interests, different needs, and even conflicting interests at play. So this is certainly a great challenge. But we do need to work together to bring about the paradigm shift that we've been talking about. Now, you will have all yourselves your takeaways, so I don't try to summarize in any way the whole set of extremely useful discussions you've been having. I also rely on my staff to, of course, provide feedback, but I do sense that there is truly a strong willingness to collaborate, and the question is how we're going to do this. What is the framework? What is the guiding principles? And your debate has really highlighted that there are a number of ingredients that are needed because, of course, meaningful dialogue has to take place to align interests and incentives, develop win-win scenarios for our public and private sector partners. And these scenarios must certainly be underpinned by global environmental, societal, and governance standards, must be anchored in long-term perspective beyond election cycles, and of course the debate has to be based on sound data and measurement. And we really need to make extraordinary efforts because of the huge challenge before us. And in the course of course, action, we need to ensure accountability. We need to ensure or apply self-governance. And I think those points were really useful. And I would just like to mention that so to address this real demand for finding practical ways of collaboration and for implementing projects that truly work for business and development communities, we need to have the right systems, the right frameworks, the right policies that support those efforts. And of course, first of all, I really thank you for being here. This is a remarkable place where we all meet across all stakeholder communities around the world, and we need to do more. And hopefully, of course, I do hope you will be able to come again. But then it's not just the number of discussions we have, the magnitude of our collaboration efforts, but it's the quality. And so at the OECD, we are very honored to host the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, the GPEDC, and be part of this movement to help improve the quality of the discussion, to improve the already existing but still to be enhanced partnerships with the private sector through development cooperation. I'm convinced that we need to really have a certain ecosystem that, with a new framework, guiding principles for private sector engagement through development cooperation. And certainly your discussions have provided the needed and the right ingredients to make this happen. Of course, the conference in Busan in 2011 was groundbreaking, but at the same time, we now need to evolve. And certainly, those efforts will be a fundamental condition for countries to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. One last point is that, of course, inclusive growth and enhanced productivity are also being recognized as the core of mainstream development thinking. Through all this, now we need to translate our ambitions into reality. And the global partnership certainly provides the inclusive setting to bring businesses and the development cooperation community together to improve these partnerships and develop practical solutions that work on the ground. We hope to continue this work, culminating in the launch of principles for effective private sector engagement through development cooperation. The goal is the Global Partnerships senior level meeting in July of this year at the High-Level Political Forum of the United Nations in New York. Let us continue this work. In closing, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of you for your active participation and support in making this happen and truly making private sector partnerships an integral part of the global development equation. I picked up this point about an integrated development package, and we are now preparing an essential element to making this happen. So I look forward to further work and to your further participation, and hope to see you soon. And let us bear in mind that today is the start of a new process, an important process, and your inputs are vital contributions. Thank you very much.